Hello there, this is Brian again with Chapter 3 of From Zero to Journey, in which today we're going to talk about why buy an Airstream. And yes, here, this is so exciting. For the first time, I'm actually in our Caravel 16RB. Today is a Monday. It came on Wednesday, and for the last few days we've been working on learning all kinds of things. I actually have a lot of great ideas for new topics that I haven't been able to find, how to tell you how to do some of the simpler things. But today I want to talk about why buy an Airstream if that's something you're thinking. And the first thing I want to say here is, one, I don't want to sound like a sales pitch from Airstream, because they do a fine job doing that themselves. But I also don't want to sound like I'm trying to convince anyone that they should get an Airstream. I'd like this to be more about why we picked an Airstream, why it made sense to us. However, I'm going to say right up front, anytime anyone buys a particular brand, they tend to develop a pretty big loyalty with that brand. That's certainly the case with brands like Apple Computer and phones, things like that, Honda cars. And so I just warn anyone watching this, please make up your own mind based on the information you find out there and the things you learn yourself. Because clearly, my wife and I bought an Airstream, so we're now part of the Airstream enthusiast club. But I think we're early enough on to having made this purchase that we can talk about why we became enthusiastic about it. So that's what I hope to do here today. First of all, when looking around and starting to look at trailers, we looked at everything except Airstream. So names like Jayco and Forest River and Rockwood and Coleman. And these are the types of brands, and there are many others, that I would say you find in your typical RV or camper lot, where there are places that carry 3 or 4 brands, or maybe they specialize in just 1 or 2 of them. But one of the things you'll notice is that they pretty much all look the same these days. They're usually white aluminum or vinyl of some sort. They have black trim, sometimes gray or maybe a little bit of color, but they all have that sort of square on the sides, maybe a rounded nose a little bit, but they're pretty much boxes, because that's the best use of space, of course. And the only thing that we notice different from one to the other of those is how many windows they have. And some of them have very few windows, nothing in the front, or maybe they do have 1 window in the front. And the other differences are the actual layout. How big is the bed? Is it in the front or the back? How big is the dinette? How big is the bathroom? Things like that. And of course, one of the big things on most trailers these days are the slide outs. Does it have 1 slide out or 2 slide outs? How big are they? Things like that. And to be honest, to the detriment of those brands, it's very hard to become loyal to any of those brands when they basically all look the same. Layouts are different, some of the appointments are different, but they pretty much, you can't tell the difference. You can't tell what brand you're in for most of those trailers. They all look the same, and a lot of them look very nice in the showroom floor. So at first glance, there was one brand that stuck out to us a little bit. They're called No Bows, or No Boundaries. And one of the things that brand has going for it is they're a bit unique. They have kind of more of this off-road look with heavy lugged tires and independent suspension with big shock absorbers, and they're higher off the ground, and they have some appointments that make it certainly look more appropriate for off-road camping. And we actually got to the point where we got a quote on one of those, because we thought, well, maybe this is the way to go. But we thought they were quite expensive compared to all the other boxes out there. So in the midst of trying to decide, gosh, which of these brands might be better than the other? Are they worth the differences in price? I started watching a lot of YouTube videos about the various travel trailer brands that are out there. And I was really disturbed to come across 2 or 3 videos that are out there, pretty popular, lots of views, that say things like 7 brands never to buy, or the problem with most campers or most trailers or most RVs. Or there are a couple of them that talk about, there's only 3 or 4 brands that you should consider. And so I started watching those, and the first thing that happened, and I'm not here, I'm never going to use this forum to talk down any particular product or any particular brand, but the gist of several of these videos is that most of the brands are built exactly the same way. They put down a steel frame, they put a plywood base over that, they build a very thin walled 1x2 wood frame on the side, and on the inside they attach something like 1/8 inch thick Luan. It's kind of like a plywood, masonite, kind of a very thin layer. That's your interior wall, and then vinyl or aluminum on the outside. And so at first glance, well, so what? That's how they're made. That's how they're made. But what they started to show in these videos is that many, if not most, of those brands have huge problems built into the way they're designed and built. In particular, leakage. And I don't think it's whether or not something can leak that's the biggest issue. It's what happens if it does. And when you have 1/8 inch Luan insulation and 1x2 studs, if water gets in those walls, they showed lots of examples where in just a few years you had major problems with mold, or the plywood itself would become mushy. And it started to get really depressing to see how many of the trailer brands are made. And I mean, some of the places that we went to said they recommend resealing, or at least checking to see if the roof needed to be resealed every 90 days. And I'm thinking, who in the world is going to do that? Maybe it's what you should do, but who in the world is going to actually do that? And of course, probably not many people, which is why they develop so many problems. There were also lots of videos about some of the components, especially when it comes to the slides, that if you think of taking something that's 6 or 8 or 10 or 12 feet wide and 4 feet deep and 6 feet high, and the weight of that, and sliding it out of the trailer and sliding it back in, you would think that would take a pretty significant piece of hardware, rails and wheels and lubricated tracks and things like that, to make something like that slide easily. And what they showed in some of these videos is that those tracks are made so poorly and so inexpensively that they'll work for a year or two, probably just around the time that the warranty runs out, and then it can be many, many thousands of dollars to repair or replace those down the road. So that, I mean, and go watch these videos, they're out there. And the thing that became quite depressing to me, I've kind of hinted at this already, is the entire industry seems to be built upon this belief that if we can make it look good in the showroom and attractive, big, open spaces, slide outs, reclining chairs, things that look attractive, people are going to buy them, because why wouldn't you buy something that looked attractive? But almost by definition, the way they're built, they are not meant to last. They're meant to get you through a few years, and then the problem is on you. So again, it was pretty depressing, until I found a couple. There's more than one, 2, 3, 4 videos out there that say things like, here are the 5 brands to consider, or the only 4 brands you should ever consider buying. And the brands that they mention fall into 2 categories. There are the fiberglass one-piece top trailers, and the ones I can think of here are Casita and Scamp and Escape, I believe, were the 3 that were mentioned in some of these videos. And the other one is Airstream. And so right away, just based on those videos, it was like, okay, so now we feel a little bit smarter about what not to buy. So I started researching those brands. And really, I looked at the fiberglass ones first, because to me, Airstream always, without having any information other than what I've gathered over the years of being live, Airstreams always seemed really kind of too different. Like there's trailers and then there's those silver things, which you see, which do kind of look cool, and they kind of look a little strange, like very retro, which sometimes feels really cool, and sometimes you go, man, why is that still around? Um, but so that's the impression. So I started looking into the fiberglass ones, the various models, and getting research and looking up those and getting prices. And the thing we discovered, because we did buy a smaller trailer, a Caravel 16RB, the thing we discovered is on a lot of those, there's a really good reviews from the standpoint of leakage, and they're made well because it's one piece. You don't have the seam problem like the other brands. Um, but they tend to be narrower than most trailers, including Airstreams. They tend on the inside to be shorter. I'm not a tall man, but the roofs in those can be as short as 6 feet or even a little less. So it started to become like, well, maybe Airstream's not a totally crazy idea. Maybe this is something we should at least look into. So, sort of what happened next is we went up on, it was actually on Father's Day of this year, on a Sunday, we went up to our local Airstream dealer. Beautiful place, big enclosed showroom, if you will. And they had every model that exists sitting there out on the floor. And we went through the base camp and we went through the Bambis of the different sizes. And it wasn't until we saw the Caravel 16, it was the first Caravel we saw, that my wife went in and said something is different. She just had this look on her face of joy. And I always like when I see that happen with my wife, because it's like, oh, so something's going on there. What is this all about? And what she discovered, which I didn't realize, is that one of the differences between the Bambi and the Caravel in the 16-foot is they both have the triple window in the front, but the Caravel has the triple window in the back as well, whereas the Bambi just has a single window in the back. And that's what really got my wife's attention, of that bed in the back. You can see panoramic all around you, and it was really quite exciting. So it was then, I'm being honest here, that the Airstream marketing machine sort of started to work on us, in the sense of they do a very good job representing their brand and getting people excited about various things. And so we picked up a few things along the way that were exciting to us. The aluminum wall structure, they're kind of built like an airplane with aluminum shaped studs, and the aluminum stretch skin on the outside and the aluminum skin on the inside, meaning there's nothing to rot in the walls. The floor is not plywood, it's a composite, so even if water were to get in or leak, the floor is not going to rot out. We did like statistic they give you, because Airstream has been around since 1931, I believe. So in the 95 years that they've been making trailers, Airstream claims that 70% of them are still on the road, still being used. And what that did for us is it cemented the fact that these are made well. They are not 1x2 wooden studs with staples holding it together to 1/8 inch plywood. And that became not just a selling point or a value that was being stated, but it started to symbolize what you really get here that's different and why they look so different. So in summary, for us, why Airstream? It's because of the contrast between this particular brand of trailer and everything else. There is nothing like it, for good or for bad. The obvious quality shows up, and certainly now that it's here, we get to see that quality. The reputation, the 1931, 95 years in business. It's obviously, at my age, easy that this trailer, outside of an accident, will outlive me. I'd be happy if I had this trailer from a purchase quality perspective for 10 or 15 years, and I don't see any reason why this trailer won't be around for 40 years and get handed down or sold off to someone else. So I personally like the kind of retro little bit quirky, 1950s diner. To me, that now has come to mean it's a distinct quality. And it's that quality and that sense of buying something that's made well, which is hard to find anymore these days, that really made it the right choice for us.